She entered her new home with dreams of love, happiness, and respect, but I discovered the truth hidden behind my mother-in-law's sweet smile. Her kindness was only a mask for a plan meant to destroy me. The night I found the documents beneath her old jewelry box, the house fell silent except for the ticking clock and my own heartbeat. I stood in the hallway, holding proof that the woman who welcomed me with warm hugs had been secretly arranging my downfall from the beginning. She wanted my marriage broken, my husband's trust lost, and my place in the family erased. I did not scream or confront her that night. I simply folded the papers, returned the box exactly as I found it, and made a quiet promise to myself. She had started a dangerous game, but she never realized I was already learning every move she planned to make. My name is Elena, and before I entered that house, I believed love was built on patience, loyalty, and the small sacrifices people make for one another. I married Daniel after 3 years of knowing his gentle heart, believing I had found a family that would finally feel like my own. His mother, Margaret, was the first person to welcome me, always placing a hand on mine and telling me I was the daughter she never had. But I slowly learned that some smiles hide more than they reveal. I had always been the person who listened more than she spoke. In my own family, my quiet nature was mistaken for weakness, and in Daniel's home, my patience became something people expected me to offer without question. I noticed the small comments, the subtle criticisms disguised as advice, the way my opinions disappeared during conversations as if they had never been spoken. I told myself it was normal. I told myself every family had difficult moments. What I didn't know was that Margaret had been studying me from the day I arrived, memorizing my kindness, my fears, and my silence. She saw my calm personality as a door she could easily open. She never understood that silence was not surrender. It was the place where I collected every detail. At first, the signs were so small that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. Margaret never raised her voice. That was what made her difficult to understand. She delivered every wound wrapped in kindness. Like the afternoon, she placed a plate of food in front of me and quietly said, "I hope you learn to cook like Daniel's first wife someday." He always enjoyed her meals. She smiled after saying it, waiting for me to react. I simply thanked her and took another bite. During family dinners, I noticed how her eyes moved whenever I spoke. She would glance at Daniel before looking away, as if sharing a private thought without saying a word. When I suggested ideas for the house, she would pause, then gently reply, "That's a sweet thought. But you're still new here. You'll understand how things work eventually." The words sounded harmless, but they always left a strange silence behind. She began rearranging things I had organized, inviting relatives over without telling me, and making decisions that affected my life while pretending she was only helping. Daniel rarely noticed. He trusted his mother completely and assumed her intentions were pure. I watched everything quietly. Every forgotten apology, every hidden insult, every moment where I was made to feel like a guest in my own home became another piece of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. The moment I stopped pretending everything was normal came on a rainy evening in November. I had returned home early and heard Margaret's voice coming from the living room. She was speaking softly, the same gentle tone she used whenever she acted concerned about me, but the words that followed froze me at the doorway. She was telling Daniel that I had become difficult, that I was changing him, and that our marriage would eventually fail if he continued choosing me over her opinions. I stood there in the darkness, listening as the woman who called me family carefully planted doubt inside her own son's mind. For years, I had tried to earn her acceptance. I had ignored the comments, forgiven the disrespect, and convinced myself that patience would eventually be rewarded. That night, I understood something important. Margaret was not misunderstanding me. She was testing how much I would tolerate. I walked into the room calmly, not with anger, but with clarity. She looked surprised for only a second before putting on her familiar smile. I smiled back. I did not reveal what I had heard. I did not accuse her or create a scene. Instead, I made a decision that changed everything. I would stop defending myself to someone committed to misunderstanding me. From that night forward, I stopped trying to win her approval. I started observing. I did not plan my revenge with anger. I planned it with patience. The first thing I did was stop reacting. Margaret had always counted on my emotions. She expected tears, arguments, or desperate attempts to prove my innocence. Instead, I gave her silence and watched carefully. I began keeping records, not because I wanted a fight, but because I wanted the truth to remain clear. I saved messages, noted conversations, and kept copies of documents related to the decisions she had quietly made on behalf of the family. Years of working in administration had taught me one thing: details reveal what people try to hide. I also started rebuilding the parts of my life I had allowed to become smaller. I reconnected with my old colleagues, returned to my professional work, and reminded myself that I was more than someone's wife or daughter-in-law. Most importantly, I stopped sharing my fears with Margaret. She noticed the change. She would ask questions disguised as concern. She would offer advice I never requested, but I no longer handed her pieces of myself she could use against me. My goal was not to destroy her. I wanted her to face the consequences of her own choices, with no lies left to protect her. So I waited, because the strongest moves are often the ones nobody sees coming. The truth finally revealed itself during a family gathering, exactly where Margaret had always felt most powerful. She had invited everyone over, filling the house with laughter, expensive decorations, and carefully chosen stories about how much she had sacrificed for her family. I watched her move from person to person, collecting admiration like she had collected control over the years. Then Daniel received a message. It was from a relative who had found the documents Margaret thought were hidden forever. The same papers that showed she had been secretly making decisions about our home and spreading false information to create distance between us. The room became quiet. For the first time, Margaret had no prepared smile. She looked at me expecting panic or anger. Instead, I calmly placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of every message, every conversation, and every detail I had carefully preserved. I did not accuse her. I did not raise my voice. I simply said, "I think everyone deserves to know the truth before making judgments." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. Daniel looked at his mother differently that day, not with hatred, but with disappointment. The person he had trusted most had been hiding behind kindness for years. I watched Margaret sit there, surrounded by the consequences of her own actions. My revenge was never about hurting her. It was about no longer allowing her to hurt me. After that day, nothing in the house felt the same. No one shouted at Margaret. No dramatic accusations were made. The change was quieter than that, and somehow it affected her more. The people who once accepted every word she said began to question the stories she told. Her carefully built image of the perfect mother slowly faded as everyone started noticing the difference between her actions and her words. Daniel struggled the most. He spent weeks trying to understand how he had missed the signs. He apologized for the moments when he had ignored my feelings, when he had mistaken my silence for acceptance. I never wanted him to choose sides. I only wanted him to finally see clearly. Margaret became more distant after that. The control she once held disappeared because people no longer responded to the version of herself she presented. But the greatest change was within me. For years, I believed keeping peace meant staying quiet. I thought being loved meant constantly proving my worth. I learned that respect cannot be begged for, and trust cannot survive where manipulation is allowed to grow. That is why this story matters. Because sometimes the hardest battles are not fought with anger. They are fought by knowing your value, protecting your truth, and having the courage to stop accepting what slowly breaks you.
Months later, I realized the greatest victory was not watching Margaret lose control. It was finding myself again. For so long, I had measured my worth by how much I could tolerate, how quietly I could endure, and how easily I could keep everyone else comfortable. I had forgotten that peace does not come from avoiding conflict. It comes from knowing you no longer have to shrink yourself to make others happy. Daniel and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. Trust did not return overnight, but it returned honestly. We learned to communicate, without letting outside voices decide what happened inside our marriage. As for Margaret, I no longer carried anger toward her. I kept my distance, not as punishment but as protection. She was still part of the family, but she was no longer allowed to control my place within it. The house that once felt like a place where I had to prove myself became a place where I could finally breathe. Looking back, I understand that my quiet revenge was never about making someone else fall. It was about standing tall after someone tried to make me feel small. And the sweetest ending was not that she finally saw my strength, it was that I finally did.